Evil alien bugs. The Brood, the Annihilation Wave, the Arachnids, the Tyranids. This is a trope that you can find pretty reliably in sci-fi all across the board, and I will eat it up every single time. As much as I enjoy the space bug archetype in most media that I find it in, there is one species of space bug that is far and away my favorite above all of the others, because I also like tropes of weird eldritch cosmic magic. Most alien insectoids are relatively mindless, existing only to eat and kill and grow, but the Hive from the Destiny games, they have another layer to this. Sure, they exist purely to kill and consume, but they are also a magical reality warping death cult. Neat. Jokes aside, the Hive are incredibly fascinating. If you've already looked into the Hive lore before, then you know what I'm talking about, but if this is your first experience with the Destiny franchise, you're going to learn a lot today. The Hive might just look like another alien bug trope on the surface, but under that exoskeleton hides some of the best written cosmic horror that I have ever seen. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about the Hive, where they came from, how their magic works, and what makes their philosophy so realistically horrifying. So without further ado, well, no, I'll be honest about it, a tiny bit of further ado. This video is part of a series that I am doing. Don't worry, you don't have to watch them in order, or at all if you don't want to, but this is part 4 of 7, recapping the entire history of Destiny as a series, now that the game's future expansions have been unfortunately cancelled, and it is on indefinite hiatus. The idea is looking back at this 12 years of world building as it currently stands, and if there are concepts in this video that intrigue you and you want to learn more, check out the other videos in the series. They're all being posted on consecutive days, so they're uploading really fast. To keep it quick and intro-friendly, I am also trying to keep every video in the series past the first one under an hour in length. Don't look at the runtime of this video. I really like the Hive, okay? I knew I was going to go over my limit on this one, but I will stick to it for the others. Despite what you may assume from that length, the majority of Hive lore is actually laid out quite clearly, as their earliest chronology is all contained within one set of lore entries called the Books of Sorrow, a set that a teenage superhero first read when they came out in 2015, setting him on a path towards loving cosmic horror forever. The Books of Sorrow are essentially the Hive Bible, explaining the history of the species, origin of their gods, and philosophy of their beliefs. It is not as long as a real religious text, because this is a video game, but it's still about 80 pages in total, which for optional video game lore is crazy. A lot of this video is going to be me simply taking you through the Books of Sorrow, pausing when appropriate to explain the specifics of Hive biology, magic, culture, etc. It is also worth noting that if I lived within the last city of the Destiny universe and released this exact video to the public at large, I might get arrested. We are going to be going into some dark magic today, so strap in, this is going to be a wild ride. Verse 1 of the Books of Sorrow introduces the reader to a faraway planet called the Fundament. The Fundament is a gas giant, with a structure made out of many chaotic and varied layers of atmosphere. One layer of the Fundament features rocky, continent-like structures, though they are not anchored to the planet itself. These continents float on a denser, ocean-like layer of atmosphere and move and shift positions over time. This is possible because those continents are not native to the Fundament. The planet is just so big and has such strong gravity that it has pulled in nearby smaller planets and moons over time, and the remnants of those celestial bodies now float inside of it. The unique geography of the Fundament also means that the planet boasts a wide variety of life, as occasionally a civilization will be able to survive their planet's fragmentation and continue existing in their new state. One of these species is called the Krill. The Krill are an insectoid species, and to put it bluntly, very, very weak. They are sapient and reasonably intelligent, but have few to no natural defenses, and the minority of them that are not killed by outside forces still only live about 8 years on average. Their civilization is so pathetic and so frequently preyed upon by others of the Fundament that it has shaped their core philosophy, leading to a sort of religious belief called the timid truth. This very depressing line of thinking essentially says that the Krill are meant to die. Their purpose is to be the bottom of the food chain. Since they can't fight back against anything above them, they've just kind of accepted it. Though of course there would be those who resisted this philosophy. Enter the protagonists of our story and the ones who will trade off narrating the Books of Sorrow. These are the 3 princesses of the Krill, sisters by the name of Xivu, Savathun, and Oryx. Xivu is a fighter, a rare warrior amongst the Krill. She is incredibly capable, especially for her species, but she is also blunt, headstrong, and impulsive. Savathun is the exact opposite. She is not a fighter, but she is incredibly cunning. Savathun is clever and calculating, though less capable of action in the moment. Then, finally, Oryx, the most curious of the 3 princesses. Unlike the vast majority of the Krill who are concerned purely for their own short lives, Oryx dreams of greater things and wants to unravel the mysteries of the universe. She seeks to explore the rest of the Fundament and perhaps even the stars beyond it one day. The sisters have 2 mentor figures. First, their teacher by the name of Teox, and secondly, their father, the Osmium King, who at the beginning of the story is already in a steep decline. The Osmium King is over 10 years old, which converting to human lifespans means he's about 100, and he has gone completely senile. The king has claimed a sort of pet or familiar in his old age, and I have to say sort of because his familiar is a corpse. He has claimed this strange, calcified, worm-like creature which just washed up on the shore one day from parts unknown, and he claims that this worm speaks to him, giving him an obsession with astronomy and visions of the future. Under this worm's apparent guidance, the king has looked to the skies above Fundament and now rants madly about some apocalypse caused by the world's moons. Whether this is true or not, the king is clearly not in his right mind, and his court begins to lose faith in him. Teox in particular fears for the survival of their people, as the king seems to be too far gone, but none of his heirs are suitable replacements. In her own words, Xivu can fight but not lead, Savathun can think but not fight, and Oryx's curiosity will draw her away from duty. So, the royal teacher betrays the Osmium court, feeding information to a rival faction of Krill so that they can invade, kill the royal family, and take over. This is not something Teox feels good about. She refers to her letter as a hateful request written in grief, but she sees no other option. The invasion occurs and is mostly successful. The Osmium court of the Krill is overthrown and the king is killed, but the sisters manage to find a ship and escape into the sea. From here, they are on their own and have 2 missions. The first of these is obvious: return and kill Teox for her betrayal, but the second is more difficult. In his final moments, the Osmium King was able to convey information to Oryx with some level of clarity for once, and Oryx, being an explorer and navigator, was able to make sense of it. The moon apocalypse he had been raving about was not some vague mystical nonsense, it was a syzygy. For those who aren't familiar with the term, a syzygy is a real thing in astronomy. It refers to an event in which 3 or more celestial bodies arrange themselves in an almost perfectly straight line. Eclipses are syzygies, as an easy example. In his observance of Fundament's moons, the king had seen them approaching a syzygy. And importantly, Fundament has 52 moons. Each of them has a gravitational effect on the tides, and if all 52 of them ever approached a perfect line, then the effect on gravity would be so large that it would create a tsunami of apocalyptic proportions. And remember, all the continents of Fundament are floating, so this would decimate them completely. With the lofty goal of somehow averting this god wave, the sisters continue their journey. Each of their unique skills plays a role in their adventures, but Savathun in particular is vital. She demonstrates a consistent ability to know what's going on. Beyond mere cunning, it seems like she has some sort of hidden knowledge. Eventually, Savathun is able to lead the sisters to a new ship, but not one merely designed to skim over the ocean. This ship can go many more places. It is damaged, but in its current state it can dive under the Sea of the Fundament, and if repaired, it could even take them into space. This is exactly what they were looking for. Of course, it is not purely good fortune that led them to this discovery. It is revealed shortly after that Savathun knows all these things because she escaped the court with her father's familiar. She took the corpse of the odd worm, and ever since, it has been speaking to her too. Clearly some nefarious forces are at play. Under the guidance of this unknown force, Savathun advises the sisters that rather than taking to the stars, they should go down. Something awaits them at the core of Fundament. Nobody knows what immediately, but there seems to be the answer to their problems. So the sisters dive, and as they plunge through the layers of the Fundament, they encounter something. A massive creature of myth that they simply refer to as the Leviathan. But the Leviathan was not what was calling them to the core. In fact, quite the opposite. The Leviathan pleaded with them to turn back, giving the sisters a warning. Save yourselves from the deep. Save the world from yourselves. The Leviathan speaks in cryptic riddles and poetry, but through this it tells the sisters of a cosmic war between two opposing forces, one of kind, hopeful life, and the other of cruel, ruthless death. The Leviathan says that it had been watching the krill for centuries, and though the insectoids were weak and frail, their continued persistence towards survival gave the creature hope. It calls the krill its treasure, its proof against despair. But the sisters are not swayed, and Zero in particular is furious. I will quote Zero's response to the Leviathan directly here because it's very good and showcases her personality nicely. She shouts, "You are huge and old. Our lives are short and desperate. If that's the way the world is supposed to be, I won't have it. If people like Teox are supposed to win, I won't let them. I'll beat the world until it changes. I will kill anything in the way." It is also at this moment that Savathun chooses to reveal her father's worm to the others, telling them that this was the source of their guidance all along. If you've seen my first video in this Destiny series, you might notice a parallel. One cosmic force that speaks vaguely in cryptic dreams, visions, and riddles, and another that speaks plainly and offers clear guidance. Where have we seen that before? A choice lies before the sisters now, a simple one on the surface, but one that will have effects on the entire universe for eons going forward. Will they turn back, or will they continue downwards? And listening to the guidance of Savathun, the sisters choose the deep. Then, deep within the unfathomable core of the Fundament, Zero, Savathun, and Oryx find the worms. Not tiny dead worms like the one that has been talking to them this entire time. No, these creatures are massive, ancient, and so infused with power that they could be called gods in their own right. 5 worm gods await the sisters here. Their names are Yul, Aer, Zol, and Akka. But they are not the only creatures at the core. No, they are accompanied by millions, if not billions, of smaller worms, much like the king's familiar. And through these smaller worms, the gods offer the sisters a bargain. Yul, the speaker of the gods, claims that the Leviathan was a liar, and in fact, it was the one that arranged the syzygy of the moons as it feared the potential that the krill possessed. And by merging with these smaller worms in a form of symbiosis, that potential could be achieved. This power carries with it immortality and control over reality itself, and the only things the gods ask for in return for this power seem quite reasonable. In their immortality, the sisters may never abandon their nature. They will be forever bound to their core traits. Zero may never cease to test her strength. Sathona may never cease to be cunning and clever, and Orash may never cease to explore and inquire. The sisters accept the offer, absorbing these fragments of dark divinity, taking on new forms and names in the process. Zero becomes Xivu Arath, Sathona becomes Savathun, and Orash becomes Oryx. These are the three principal gods of the Hive. Of course, the Hive as a species do not technically exist yet. There are only these three members representing all of them. But that is about to change, as the newly empowered gods return to the surface of Fundament with the millions of worms in tow, and begin the process of converting the krill into new shapes. Every member of the krill is imbued with a dark worm, weaker than those of the gods, of course, but with the same sort of magical energies. This is not an optional process. Anyone who rejects this symbiosis is made an example of. Now the Hive truly exist, and we can divert from the narrative of the Books of Sorrow to talking about their biology, because boy, the Hive are very freaky. Every member of the Hive that we see in-game is actually two entities living in symbiosis. The main body, which is an evolved form of the krill, and the worm inside of them. These are distinct beings. They are born separately and then bonded together shortly after birth. The worms are the conduit for Hive magic, which stems from the paracausal force known as the darkness. See the first video in this series for more information on how the darkness works specifically, but for now, it is a force of cosmic simplicity that allows you to warp reality with the ultimate goal of reducing things to less complex forms. I will go into more about Hive magic and how that works once we've progressed farther in the Books of Sorrow, but for purposes of biology, it revolves heavily around death and this concept of reduction in the universe. That is what powers Hive magic, and it is also what powers the worm itself. It's like their food. They feed on reality warping. This has the side effect of requiring the Hive to kill in order to survive. Since the worms feed on death, and the Hive are bound to their worms irreversibly, if Hive do not actively kill things, they will die. If they kill a little bit, they will continue to exist, but if they kill enough, they can actually grow in power and physical size. Going briefly into the enemy types of the Hive that we see in-game, they exist in an almost linear life cycle. Most Hive, save for like demigods who have access to more power immediately, begin lives as thrall. If they exist for long enough as a thrall, they will be promoted and transform into an acolyte. Exist long enough as an acolyte, and they will be promoted once again into either a knight or a wizard. Typically, knights are thought of as male Hive and wizards are thought of as female Hive, but this is more for human convenience than anything else. Hive don't really have a concept of gender because of the way that their life cycle works. All Hive essentially start out the same and then will change and develop biological sex based on the path that they choose in their life cycle. This is actually a real thing that happens with actual animals, more present in fish than in insects, but still, some real animals do change sex as they age. Whether an acolyte becomes a knight or a wizard seems to be based only on personal preference, and there is some variation on how they are presented. The Hive are ultimately a species hyper-optimized for mass killing, and don't do much outside of that, so gender is a sort of cultural thing that they just don't have any need for. Any other Hive forms that exist outside of the thrall, acolyte, knight, wizard life cycle are either constructs or experiments. For example, ogres are just thrall that have been subjected to a torturous series of rituals turning them into that form. That is not a thing a Hive will grow into naturally. Speaking of Hive bioengineering experiments, see pretty much everything else that they have. The Hive very rarely work with machinery in the traditional sense. Everything that they utilize, their structures, their weapons, even their spaceships, are grown organically. Where other species would use metal, Hive use hardened bone or chitin plating, and anything that they cannot artificially grow, they supplement with magic, leading to technology that kind of looks primitive, but is just as advanced as other spacefaring civilizations. Now we can return to the Books of Sorrow, and skip pretty quickly through the next couple of verses because it is mostly just the newly born Hive killing a lot. Under the command of their new gods, the Hive exterminate everything else on Fundament and then turn their attention to the moons. The Hive are, at this point, drunk on power. They have gone from being the lowest thing on the food chain to being the uncontested top in the entire ecosystem, and so they want to see how far that can go. But in looking to the moons of the Fundament, they find another civilization, one that is far higher than theirs is because it has been uplifted by the Traveler. The Traveler is, once again, something that you can learn more about in the first video of this series, but for today's quick summary, it is a cosmic force of complexity, in stark opposition to the darkness that the Hive are using. It travels from civilization to civilization, uplifting those that it finds and providing them with advancement. The Traveler's assistance means that these people, known as the Ammonites, are comparable to, if not stronger than the Hive, and so the endless campaign of violence that the Hive have been waging slows for a time. The conflict becomes so prolonged that Oryx begins to have doubts. This is still early into his reign as a god, and when he was Orash, he was a kind and curious being, so destroying entire civilizations that could have answers to questions is not particularly in his nature. But the darkness demands it, and provides him with a new tool. Through the teachings of the worm gods, Oryx discovers a fundamental truth of the universe, the underlying mechanics that support his new power. This is known as the sword logic, and it is one of my favorite magic systems in all of fiction. Something very important to know as we go into this explanation is that the magic of destiny as an entire universe revolves entirely around reality warping. It is about imposing your will onto the universe itself, and through doing that, changing the rules of how the universe works. The worms tell Oryx something to this effect, as first described in verse 2:6 of the Books of Sorrow. You are no longer bound by causal closure. Your will defeats law. Kill 100 of your children with a long blade, Oryx, and observe the change in the blade. Observe how the universe shrinks from you in terror. Your existence begins to define itself. Let's put this in more grounded terms. You as a person, like you watching this video right now, have limited control over reality. You cannot warp reality like the Scarlet Witch or something, at least I assume not, but you can make decisions and then act on those decisions. That does change things about reality in your immediate vicinity, even if it's on a tiny scale. Everyone could do that. If you as a person gain more control and influence over things in the real world, that technically increases your power over reality. As you gain more ability to make tangible change, that means you are warping things more and more. So, let's say you kill someone. You give into a dark impulse and murder them. For YouTube content guidelines purposes, I am talking about a fictional magic system in a video game. None of this is real. I am not condoning murder. By killing that person, you have not only influenced your reality, but you have influenced theirs going forward. Let's say that person was going to live for another 50 years. That is 50 years of decisions and choices that you have just made all in one single instant. That action has controlled reality far more than most others. The scary thing about this is that we're not really at the fantasy part yet. Everything that I've just said is technically true. That's kind of just how the flow of time works. And Destiny takes this concept and expands it to fantasy levels, saying that, hey, if you kill a lot of people, hundreds, thousands, millions even, you are exercising your control over reality so much that eventually you can warp it to your own whims. If you kill an entire civilization, then every decision and bit of influence that civilization could have ever enacted is now yours to command. This is the sword logic. Kill, cut out the reality of others, and take it for your own, and this increases your power. It is a terrifying, dark, evil philosophy, but man, it is pretty cool in concept. With understanding of the sword logic, the Hive campaigns grew ever more ruthless because, well, the system worked. Sword logic was evidently a truth of reality, not one that even the previously kind and gentle Orash could deny. If you kill, you get stronger, and that means the universe is not a kind place at all. The next several chapters of the Books of Sorrow are the events that shape Hive philosophy around this core ideal. Hive culture, if you can even call it that, is essentially just survival of the fittest, escalated to its highest pinnacle. The ultimate goal of the Hive as a collective is to cut away reality from those who do not deserve it. Their species came from the krill, they came from weakness, and they seek to eliminate that weakness in all things. In the minds of the Hive, they want to create a perfect universe, one in which every being has the control over their reality that they deserve. However, for this to be achieved, this means that those undeserving of reality need to have it stripped from them. So, they kill. The Hive try and kill everything that they come across because to them, anything that can be killed was unworthy of their life to begin with. If they are flawed enough that they are mortal, then they are imperfections in the ultimate universe that the Hive strive for. They do not see killing as evil. In fact, they actively see it as a good thing. Death is not a tragedy, it is honing the universe to perfection, refining it through process of elimination, even if that is among their own kind. Say you are a Hive acolyte, and you have been fighting alongside your brood for many years. The rest of your companions are your friends, your battle brothers, and you love them. But then, one fateful day, a wayward guardian sweeps right through your nest, killing almost everybody, but, probably because they got distracted by loot or something, leaving you alive as the sole survivor. There is not a moment where you feel sadness about this. Sure, the corpses that now surround you were once your family, but they're not anymore. They are dead, and always should have been. This is their fate. This is what you wanted. This is what they wanted, and the universe is better off for their death. Because ultimately, death to the Hive is an act of love. This is not implication or fan theory, this is explicitly stated in the lore. There is a line in which Oryx refers to his descendants as sons and daughters to love and to kill. To the Hive, the universe is an endless crucible. Those who live are worthy of their existence, and those who died are trash that was never worth it in the first place. I think the thing that makes this the scariest is that it feels weirdly believable. Like, obviously this is a horrible fantasy monster religion, but it also seems kinda like something that a real-world cult would believe. It strikes a balance that makes it very, very unsettling. Following the dark philosophy of the sword logic also explains why the Hive have such a burning hatred for the Traveler and the Guardians. The Guardians because they can return themselves from death, and the Traveler because it facilitates life by uplifting those that it reaches. The Traveler is a fundamentally altruistic entity. It provides its power free of charge to anyone that it comes across. And to the Hive, a cosmic being uplifting the weak purely off of generosity is blasphemy. This is essentially a lie into the grand scheme of reality, and they really would like it to stop. This also leads to another grand sin within Hive religion, necromancy. Necromancy is heretical because you are bringing back something that has already proven its unworthiness. That very act makes the universe worse. They are capable of necromancy. Hive magic can do that, and there are some necromancers among their ranks, but they are basically a fringe cult. This thinking is very, very bad to the Hive at large, and anyone who is discovered as a necromancer is excommunicated. This is actually the central focus of one of the smaller Destiny expansions, following the best Hive necromancer, Nokris, who also happens to be the son of a Hive god, exiled for his dark research. As a natural conclusion of all this thinking, much Hive magic revolves around finding ways to avoid death altogether. Higher-ranking Hive act kind of like cosmic liches. They can take conceptual pieces of their being and hide them in other things or places. Then if the rest of them is killed, that piece will remain alive and they can be resurrected from there, meaning that they never technically died, at least not fully. It's a bit of a loophole, but one that works. The highest form of this magic involves the creation of something called a throne world. Throne world creation is a very difficult thing to achieve, as it requires a lot of amassed sword logic energy or a similar power. The only ones who do this reliably are the Hive gods, though a few other characters within the Destiny universe have made their own throne worlds under special circumstances. A throne world is kind of like a magical pocket dimension that one can make once they have claimed enough reality to their name. Get enough of the universe under your sole control, and you can splinter it off into a sort of bubble. Within a throne world, the laws of reality are subject to the whim of its creator, making them incredibly powerful, though the size and complexity of the dimension depends on how much power exactly that creator has. But making yourself a home dimension isn't really the goal of a throne world, at least not typically. It is an ultimate engine for immortality. Beings with a throne world can only be killed in that realm, at least permanently. Kill one outside of their throne world, and they will simply resurrect in their own reality. From there, they can recover and eventually return to the real world as many times as necessary. A limiting factor to this is that these worlds must be maintained to a certain degree. They require a flow of power to keep active, and that means they require a flow of murder, which most beings are not willing, or at least not capable of providing. This is another purpose of the Hive as a collective. Their entire species kind of functions like a pyramid scheme, diverting power directly to the gods at the tips of it. To ensure this flow of power and their continued immortality, Xivu Arath, Savathun, and Oryx established the tribute system. Under the system of the sword logic, power can be freely given or transferred, but only in one direction. It can only flow up the chain to stronger beings, not down. Whenever any Hive of any rank kills anything, they gain power from that action. They keep a portion of this power for themselves, enough to feed their worm and continue their life cycle, and the remaining is sent up the chain, to the acolytes, knights, wizards, etc., eventually reaching the gods. And since there are so many Hive exterminating entire species at any given time, this provides enough sword logic energy that the gods remain in control. Now, with the foundations of their magic explained, we return to the Books of Sorrow and the Hive's continuing war on everything else that dares exist within the universe. They were successful in most of their offenses and exterminated hundreds of civilizations, but eventually came to one with more power than all the others, known as the Ecumene. The Ecumene had also been empowered by the Traveler and possessed enough strength that they were able to hold the Hive back, even with the presence of all three gods going against them. So, in a final desperate play, the Hive gods decided to combine their strength, and the only way for that to happen was for one to kill the others. Thus, Oryx killed his own sisters, through the sword logic amassing all the power that they possessed as well. This elevated him to unforeseen levels, allowing him to enter a different realm of existence entirely, known as the Ascendant Plane. The Ascendant Plane is not a realm of matter and law, but one of thought and concept, and through this magical place, Oryx was able to once again commune with one of the ancient worm gods, Akka. and their conversation did not go well, as Oryx was not there to ask for power, he was there to take it. By slaying Akka within the Ascendant Plane and inscribing the secrets he learned through that action on the worm god's flesh, Oryx developed a new technique, a new application of the sword logic in a way, one that did not claim reality by removing the future from its victims, instead claiming reality through eliminating that victim's free will, binding all of their future choices to the will of a master. And in doing so, Oryx became the Taken King. By taking an entity, Oryx essentially rips it out of existence and cuts it down into a strengthened and more efficient form. It is then returned to prime reality, but with all concept of choice eliminated from the being's mind. It only exists to serve the one that took it, meaning that its reality is now bound to Oryx, increasing his power much like killing does, though in a way that is more practical for military application. The Ecumene crumbled. There was nothing they could do against this new power as their own forces turned against them, and through this victory, Oryx resurrected his sisters, bringing Xivu Arath and Savathun back to life, though technically, by Hive logic, they had never died. Remember that the Hive gods were bound to their natures the moment they took on the worms, and evidently that system went both ways in a way. Since Hive can hide their deaths, so to speak, inside other things, the Hive gods hid pieces of themselves in the concepts that they embodied. So, when Oryx manipulated the Ecumene forces, luring them into a grand trap that resulted in the extermination of much of their armies, this action resurrected Savathun, as an act of cunning so grand was enough to bring the goddess of trickery back to life. Xivu was resurrected sometime later when the Ecumene finally went extinct. Xivu Arath, as the goddess of battle and war, came back to life through this act of genocide. This did not mean that the three Hive gods were a unified front again, though. Shortly after this, they would split up, each leading their own broods and factions, though all of them ultimately worked towards the same goal. See, because of the way Hive philosophy works, they weren't really enemies, but they did fight each other. The Hive gods attempt to kill each other constantly, but as we've established, killing is an act of love to the Hive. When they try and murder each other, this is like honing each other's edges, refining them for the ultimate final shape of the universe. So now the story splits up, and we can follow each of the Hive gods individually for a bit. The remainder of the Books of Sorrow follows Oryx exclusively, but I'm going to start with Xivu Arath because she is the quickest. The other two Hive gods were the prime focus of two major expansions to Destiny, Oryx being the villain of the Taken King, and Savathun being the villain of the Witch Queen. But Xivu never really got this treatment. I guess there wasn't enough time for her. She was a villain, but never directly. As most events of the Destiny games were going on, Xivu Arath was far away doing other things. We do know some of what she was doing, and I will cover that in another one of these videos as it relates heavily to another faction, but she only appeared present in the game towards the end of its life. Xivu Arath has not been fought within the game. She's not a boss. There is no model of her in the game's files. We have fought many of her minions and heralds and foiled some of her schemes, but she has always remained distant. We do, at the very least, know her status at the end of the game's lifespan, and that status is severely weakened thanks to the actions of Hive-touched guardian Eris Morn. Eris, who I've already covered a bit in one of these videos, was able to temporarily become a Hive god herself by killing Savathun, though not permanently, that's a whole other thing that I'll get into in just a second. And while empowered as the Hive god of vengeance, she cast a spell that banished Xivu Arath from her own throne world. This means that Xivu is no longer immortal. She cannot resurrect there, so when and if she is eventually fought, she can theoretically be killed forever. That is ultimately kind of it, though. There is a little bit more I could go into for Xivu Arath, but she is largely irrelevant to the game, and I have way more to say about the other two gods, so we'll move on to them. Oryx is next, the first Hive god that we ever fought way back in Destiny 1. Oryx, as the Taken King, was often seen as the most powerful Hive god, though this is kind of subjective depending on how you view power. Oryx's decision to attack Earth and the Sol System was not done arbitrarily or even in the general course of the Hive trying to attack everything. He was called to the system by a specific event, and that was the death of his son. Oryx made the decision to have children shortly after gaining the power to take. Events around that time led to him getting trapped in suspended animation in another dimension for a bit, and while there he had time to think on his philosophy, eventually coming to the conclusion that he was losing faith in his mission and becoming a nihilist. As he did not want that to happen, once he was freed from his prison, he decided to reproduce, giving him something to care about again. This is where the sons and daughters to love and to kill line comes from. Oryx had 4 children that we know of, twin wizards named Ir Anuk and Ir Halak, his youngest son, Nokris, who is the one exiled for necromancy that I mentioned a while ago, and of course, his most important spawn, Crota. Crota's first major story provides us one of the coolest moments in Hive lore, and also one of the funniest just a couple pages later. This takes place aboard the Dreadnought, Oryx's massive command ship, which also contains a manifestation of his throne world projected into physical reality. See, Crota, despite being extremely powerful and actually being the second raid boss Destiny ever released, is an idiot. Crota is extremely dumb and easily influenced, and Savathun took advantage of this. As a result of manipulation by Savathun, Crota decided to try out a new technique with his fledgling reality warping powers, and wielding his mighty magical blade, cut a tear into the fabric of reality, which opened up an interdimensional portal. This portal then started spewing Vex everywhere, because Crota had cut into the Vex network dimension by mistake. Now, the Vex are going to get a whole video later in this series. They are very, very complicated, but for today's purposes, they are basically your standard supercomputer robot enemy faction. They want to understand and assimilate all of existence. And Crota just let them into not only his father's headquarters, but his father's throne world, where Oryx can be killed permanently. So this was a big whoopsie. Oryx was not present at the time, he was off conquering somewhere else. So this was essentially the cosmic sci-fantasy equivalent of a spoiled rich kid throwing a party in his dad's mansion while his dad wasn't home, and it went about as well as you'd expect. The battle went on for 100 years, as it was essentially a stalemate. In the throne world, the Hive were incredibly powerful and could defeat the Vex, but inside the Vex network, they were the more powerful ones, so the Hive could not go on the offensive and cut the invaders off at the source. The battle eventually dragged on for so long that Oryx came home. Using the power of taking, Oryx was able to turn the Vex against themselves and therefore gain the upper hand. The leader of the Vex incursion, a supermind named Quiria, would learn from this, and he'll be relevant in just a minute, but for now the catastrophe was over. And Crota was in big trouble. This is one of my favorite lines in all of the Books of Sorrow because I love imagining how hilarious this looked in the moment. Before closing the rift into the Vex portal network, Oryx decided that there had to be consequences for this action, and so we get this. "My son," Oryx said, "this is your punishment. Come home glorious or die forgotten." Then he picked Crota up by the legs and threw him into the Vex Gate network. Oryx essentially says, "All right, you want to screw around with portals in my house? Go have fun," then picks his kid up by the legs and chunks him right in there. It's ridiculous, and I love it. Crota would eventually pop out of the portal network somewhere else in space and continue the Hive mission of exterminating everything that they could possibly exterminate. This led him to the Sol System, where he would set up base on the moon and come into conflict with the Guardians much farther down the line. Crota damn near won the early years of this war, actually. He killed thousands of Guardians himself, and is the reason why humans abandoned the moon entirely for more than a century. They were just scared of Crota and his armies. He would eventually be weakened as a large part of his tribute pyramid scheme was cut off due to unrelated reasons, and he retreated back into his throne world so that he could recover power. But Guardians did what Guardians do and followed him in there, which is where the raid Crota's End takes place. His soul was defeated in his throne world, and that was the end of him forever. News of Crota's demise eventually reached Oryx, and wanting to avenge his son, plus, follow the sword logic and kill the things that were stronger than his son, the Hive God began making his way to Earth as well. And that is the plot of Destiny's Taken King expansion. By this point in the timeline, all remnants of Oryx's previously kind personality as Orash had been stripped from him, but he was about to have to confront those memories directly in an incident related to Crota's big Vex mistake, as the Vex leader Quiria returned. This second conflict with the robotic invader is where the really cool scene I mentioned a bit ago from the Books of Sorrow finally happens. Quiria attempts to simulate a version of Oryx so that it can run internal tests on it and come up with a better way to defeat the Hive God. But as will be a major part of the Vex video, Vex systems aren't really good with magic, and so Quiria was not able to simulate Oryx properly. In a desperate attempt to create an Oryx simulation, but without all of the magic, Quiria did manage to basically recreate Orash, if only for a moment, leading to a terrifying scene in which Oryx is forced to confront a literal hologram of his past. Orash asks what she has become, and Oryx tells her that he has become everything that she ever wished. He has seen the stars and gained power beyond the fundament. But Orash is not interested in that. The only question that she has for her future self is, where are her sisters? Where are the people that she grew up alongside, that she loved, and that now Oryx has killed time and time again? It's an excellent representation of how the sword logic has twisted Oryx's mind over the centuries, and rather than learning from this confrontation, Oryx, in a fit of rage, kills the simulation of Orash, literally and figuratively putting an end to his former life. This storyline, and in fact all the Books of Sorrow, were revealed to the player first in the Taken King expansion. Though, somewhat ironically, despite giving a ton of backstory lore on the Hive, the actual narrative of Taken King is really straightforward. Oryx arrives in the Sol System to avenge Crota, the Guardians halt his offense, invade his throne world, and kill him. Don't get me wrong, Taken King is a great expansion, one of my top 3 in the game's entire history, but for a quick summary like this, yeah, that is really all that I need to say. Oryx has not returned since the Taken King, at least not in full capacity. A later chapter of the game did briefly feature an artifact called the Echo of Navigation, which was like a pseudo-entity formed out of memories taken from a younger Oryx. But this thing mostly existed to shine a light on the other Hive gods. It was destroyed and didn't exist for very long. His death is actually the most important thing that happens in the Taken King storyline, because that means his sword logic was available for the taking, and nobody took it. See, sword logic is not something that only the Hive can use. It is a magic that they are very specifically attuned to, but they are not the exclusive wielders. Whoever killed Oryx could rightfully claim all of his great power, and the Guardians who killed him didn't do that. The demise of the Taken King left a gigantic power vacuum, or power surplus, really, as under the sword logic, his amassed reality had to be claimed by somebody. Several powers tried to jump on this free magic, but the one who got perhaps the most use out of it was, surprise, surprise, the third Hive god, Savathun, who had been manipulating just so much of everything the entire time. See, Savathun has a very different strategy compared to the other Hive gods. Existing for thousands of years as a goddess of trickery and cunning and lies gave her a different perspective on the long game when it came to their goals. Unfortunately, we still don't know the end game that Savathun was trying to reach, and I'm gonna disappoint a lot of people here. It disappoints me as well. The next major expansion of the game would have followed up on this plot line, but then all future Destiny 2 projects were canceled, so I have no idea where this is going and have to just speculate based on what we got already. Ultimately, we do at least know that Savathun's goal is essentially to be free from control in any form. This includes the worm that she is symbiotically bound to, this includes the worm gods, and it even includes the laws of the universe itself. This is way too deep for me to get into heavily during this sort of introductory course style of video, but it is hinted at that Savathun might be aware of the fourth wall in some way or another. It kinda seems like she knows she's in a video game and would like to escape that video game into a reality that is more real in one way or another. Though part of this could not be intentional fourth wall breaking and just kind of like a metaphor, we're not entirely sure. In service of this goal, whatever it specifically turns out to be, Savathun has manipulated pretty much every person and or faction within the Destiny universe. Genuinely, it would be easier for me to list characters that she has not gaslit over ones that she has. Interestingly, this actually ties into one of her sources of power, as she does not really wish to use the sword logic anymore, as that binds her to her worm. She sought out another way of claiming reality, and manipulation was the way that she did that. In service of a new path to power, which she named Imbaru, Savathun intentionally leaked parts of her infinitely complex schemes to various parties throughout reality. Some of this information was accurate, and other bits were completely red herrings. But the goal at the end of the day was to make it impossible to tell the truth from the lies and keep people guessing. This functioned similarly to killing under the sword logic. When people obsessed over Savathun's plans and desperately tried to work out what she was doing, they were giving their reality and their decisions over to her unconsciously. And much like the sword logic, she could draw power from this. This is a great extension of the power system and works very well thematically for Savathun. I like how it plays on mental power and influence rather than physical power and murder. Essentially, Imbaru says that if you have enough people listening to you, that gives you control over reality just like any other form of power does. Sounds like something that a guy with a decently successful YouTube channel could do. Huh. You know what? Don't worry about that. Now, because the convoluted nature of it is kind of the entire point of Savathun's whole plan given Imbaru, I'm not going to explain every aspect of it in this introductory video, because I was going to say it would take too long, but it's actually kind of just impossible since that arc never reached its conclusion. Like I said, the game got canceled, and Savathun's one of my favorite characters, so I'm really sad about that. But there is one part of it that I absolutely have to detail because this is vital to the latter years of Destiny. Savathun did something that no other enemy in the entire course of the game, and actually the universe of Destiny, was able to do. She was able to take the light for herself and make her own guardians. This was one of the biggest twists in the entirety of Destiny. Players had known that the Traveler had been to many civilizations before humanity over billions of years, but as far as we were aware, humans were the only ones that it had given superpowers to directly. And then suddenly the Witch Queen expansion rolls around, and the Hive are throwing our own powers back at us, and everyone is freaking out. The Hive even got their own ghosts, which the Traveler was kind enough to make aesthetically thematic for them. So then the question immediately became, how? How did Savathun pull this off? Did she steal the light? Did she trick the Traveler into providing it? Or was the Traveler simply abandoning humanity in favor of a new favorite species? Any of these seemed equally possible. Remember, Savathun intentionally makes her plans confusing because that quite literally empowers her magic, and the Guardians have been trying to piece out these plans for over a year at this point. But the real answer turned out to be kind of less sinister and more sinister at the same time, depending on how you look at it. In reality, Savathun had not tricked the Traveler at all. It had given her and her brood the light willingly. Shortly before the events of the Witch Queen, Savathun had taken a huge step towards her ultimate goal of being free of all control by getting the Guardians and their allies to exorcise her own worm from her body. This technically worked. Savathun was indeed now free of the pact that she and her sisters had made with the ancient worm gods. But the Witch Queen had underestimated how vital that worm had become to her biology and began dying quickly after this. In her final moments, Savathun gazed up at the Traveler, which she had always seen as an ancient enemy, and when she finally succumbed to her injuries, the Traveler brought her back, not because she had tricked it or scared it or threatened it, but well, we don't really know why. It's never been fully explained, but presumably it's just because the Traveler is good at its core. There is another potential reason why the Traveler favored the Hive, but we'll get to that in just a second. First, I have to highlight an aspect of the Witch Queen campaign that I think is really good world building, because while Savathun was now a Guardian and had all the same powers that the players do, she also didn't get special treatment, and her memories were erased when she was revived. Guardians lose their memories when first revived by the Traveler, as with most of the magical concepts in this series. See the first Destiny video that I made for more information on that. But the Witch Queen without all her memories, the goddess of cunning without all of her long-laid plans, how good is that, really? Well, Savathun had planned for this. Most missions within the Witch Queen take place before her reveal as a true Guardian and revolve around the players diving deep into the past, hoping to gain some insight on Savathun's history so that we can figure out how she stole the light. And that was all happening intentionally. Savathun was well aware that the light could erase memory, and in case that ever happened to her, she hid fragments of her own history buried within esoteric spells and hidden altars. Then, when the Guardian was trying to figure out her plan, they just kind of ran through all of these places, followed the clues, and discovered Savathun's history. For her, as she was watching us the whole time, just kind of sitting back and viewing events from her own past like they were a movie. So we weren't tracking down any clues as to her operations, we were just giving her her memories back, playing into her weird buggy claws the entire time. One of these memories, technically a memory of Savathun's worm and not Savathun herself, provides some very interesting insight on the Books of Sorrow, because the Books of Sorrow were wrong. Well, technically not wrong, per se. As far as we're aware, the Books of Sorrow are still largely accurate to the history of the Destiny universe. What's wrong is the reason that the Krill princesses went off on their journey to begin with. The syzygy, the God Wave, the promised apocalypse that forces of darkness had been whispering in the ear of the Osmium King, that was all a lie. There was no danger to the people of Fundament. They could have survived perfectly fine, and in fact would have been better off, as the Traveler was coming for them next. Flashbacks within the Witch Queen reveal that if Savathun, or Sathona at the time, had simply not listened to the whispers of the worm, the Krill would have been uplifted by the Traveler shortly after, and the entire reason that that worm corpse had simply washed up on the shore of the Osmium King's court was that the darkness was trying to lead them away, claim the Krill before the Traveler could get to them. How the darkness knew the Traveler was approaching, and how the worm gods became the worm gods in the first place, is a topic for another video, but ultimately this revelation means that everything the Hive were built on was a lie. The darkness tricked the Krill into giving up their freedom right before it would have been provided to them as a gift. This helps shed a little bit of light, pun intended I guess, as to why the Traveler was willing to give Savathun and her brood light abilities. It apparently had always intended to, and this was just it finally getting the opportunity to fix that billions of years old mistake. Once all of this was revealed to both parties involved, Savathun and her Lucent brood kinda became allies to humanity. There was a big theme in the later years of Destiny that the Guardians were allying with previously enemy factions, mostly because of the grander threat of Destiny's ultimate big bad, the Witness. Savathun never got all the way to friendship, though. It was very much an enemy of my enemy and friend of a friend situation. Savathun had previously worked with the Witness, but had betrayed them, so they were not on good terms, and the Traveler had uplifted her, so clearly she can't be entirely bad, at least not as bad as the rest of the Hive. It was kind of always an open secret that Savathun was working more for her own plans than for any sort of altruism, but she was working with us, and that was good enough. She even allowed herself to be killed by Eris Morn, as I mentioned a while ago, as this would drain all of her power into Eris, amplifying her and allowing her to cast that spell that exiled Xivu Arath from her throne world. She came back from this, of course. Savathun is now a light bearer, she has her own ghost, his name is Amaru, and he's very grumpy. And this brings us to what is more or less the current state of Savathun and the Hive in general in Destiny 2's now indefinite limbo. Once the Witness was defeated, Savathun remained less of an ally to the Guardians. We still fight her forces on occasion, but if a larger threat ever appears once again, we can kind of count on her help, maybe. We all know that she will betray the Guardians if it works for her plans in the long run, but currently, Savathun and her Hive seem to be working towards her ultimate goal of freedom. This brings her into conflict with the other remaining Hive god, Xivu Arath, who still wants to follow the original ideals of the Hive. So the Hive are fully split into two separate warring factions now, not really warring out of love, but out of actual opposing philosophies. And yeah, I don't know where that's going because Destiny is done. It's a bit of an unsatisfying conclusion, but that's not really my fault, is it? And regardless of Savathun's arc being unfinished, I still love the Hive in general. The idea of a species that gains metaphysical power by metaphorically claiming reality as their own is super cool. Now I am nearing, if not already over, my rough hour limit for these videos, and even this was a quick summary. Destiny players, you can confirm if you know the deep lore, this was like half of the Hive at most, but I think I covered the basics of it. That said, there is one more piece of Hive lore, a very tiny one, but one that I want to end the video on. If you read a lot of Hive lore or listen to Hive-related dialogue, you will see a word come up somewhat frequently. Aiat. A-I-A-T. This is a word in the Hive language, and it has no particular power on its own. It's not a magic spell or anything, but I think the meaning of it is fascinating. Aiat is essentially the Hive religion equivalent of the word Amen, and if you were to translate it literally, it means "it is what it is," which is not particularly weird or intimidating. It's actually kind of silly that the Hive are saying that all the time, but in context, it goes a lot deeper. Aiat is an expression of religious reverence and devotion, translating better to "it is what it is because it can be no other way." It is an expression of inevitability. It's actually very comparable to Thanos saying "I am inevitable" from the Avengers movies. The word shows that the speaker truly believes in what they see as the truth of reality. Something is true, was true, will be true, Aiat. On its own, this is not particularly scary. Anyone can say Aiat about any religiously held beliefs, but out of the mouths of the Hive, a people who firmly believe that anything which can be killed should be killed, well, a Hive looking at you and saying Aiat means some very bad things are about to happen. And if that's not a beautiful dash of world building, I don't know what is. Man, I really like the Hive. Thank you all so much for watching the latest video in my Destiny series. As always, I do hope you enjoyed. Even though this one is unashamedly my favorite, there's a lot more coming, so stay tuned. Things are going to remain weird, just in different ways. Since I'm definitely over my self-imposed time limit now, I will keep this outro relatively short today, but I will still take the time to shout out My Name is Bife, also on YouTube, as it is well deserved. My Destiny videos are intended as a look back over the lore of the series as a whole, and I'm presenting things relatively quickly in a sort of crash course format. If you really like the ideas I've presented here today, go check out Bife, because he is going to go into way more detail on everything I've discussed today and more. Now back to me, I have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as a Patreon exclusive video every month. My username there is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to that on my channel page and in the description of this video, so it's very easy to find. And extra double thank you to everyone who already supports me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys. Also, shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He drew the poses of the character that's been talking at you for the last hour, so if you like those, go check out his other work as well. And now, nothing complicated for me to add in the final line this time around. What else can I say but Aiat?